Welcome back to the Old Photo Vault channel. The figure by the path, England. Photograph dated C. Late 1800s, later colorized. At first glance, the image feels too modern. The greens are vivid, the light soft and natural. Nothing like the stiff black and white photographs we associate with the 1800s. But many old cemetery photographs were later hand-colored or digitally colorized, especially those preserved by local archives, trying to restore what the eye once saw. The graveyard itself fits the period. Narrow paths, leaning headstones, and burials pressed close to the forest edge were common in rural England during the late 19th century. What draws attention is the shape on the left side of the frame. A pale, human-sized figure standing just off the path. It doesn't look posed. It doesn't look intentional. Church records from that era often mention children buried without marked stones, victims of fever or illness, laid to rest quietly near the boundary of consecrated ground. Families remembered them by habit rather than markers. "She's near the path," they would say. The figure in the photo seems to face the graves, not the camera. As if it wasn't meant to be seen, only remembered. And perhaps the color doesn't make it clearer. Perhaps it only makes the absence harder to ignore. The one standing beyond the tape. Woodland crime scene. Early 2000s. I was already used to the silence of scenes like this. Woods absorb sound. They make everything feel distant, even urgency. I remember adjusting my gloves, kneeling near the markers, documenting the body exactly as protocol required. Numbers, angles, evidence. Nothing personal. I raised the camera to photograph the area near marker 3. That's when I felt it. That faint pressure you get when someone is standing too close behind you. I didn't turn around. I just took the photo. Later, while reviewing the images, I noticed the figure. Just beyond the tape. Slight, human-shaped. It stood where no one had been assigned, where no officer, no civilian, no technician should have been. The shape was blurred, but upright, facing the body. Not the camera. This wasn't motion blur. I hadn't moved. The shutter speed was right. Cases like this sometimes come with history. Locals later told me the trail had a reputation. Runaways, missing persons, deaths ruled accidental because nothing could be proven. One young woman, years earlier, vanished after walking this path alone. No suspect. No closure. What unsettled me most wasn't seeing the figure. It was realizing that, in the photo, it looked like she was watching us work. Quietly, patiently, as if waiting to see whether this time, someone would finally understand what happened to her. The one who still waits. Dorian Hospital, Southern United States. Closed in 1960s. When Dorian Hospital shut its doors, it did so quietly. No ceremony, no final announcement. The town had already begun to shrink, and the building was left behind, with beds still bolted to the floor and charts stacked in drawers no one bothered to empty. This photograph was taken years later when someone returned out of curiosity. At first, the entrance looks empty. Just a neglected hospital, its windows dark, its name faded above the doorway. But standing in the shadow beneath the sign is a figure. Pale, upright, almost human. Almost. Former staff records mention a long-term patient admitted in the hospital's final years. A young woman who was never discharged, not because she recovered, but because no family came to claim her. When funding ran out, patients were transferred, except those already too weak to move. Locals say she used to stand in that doorway during visiting hours, watching the road, waiting for someone who never arrived. What makes this image unsettling isn't the shape itself. It's the placement. She stands exactly where patients once waited to be called inside. Not wandering the halls, not reaching outward, just standing in the threshold. Between care and abandonment. Between inside and outside. Some buildings remember their purpose, and some spirits seem unable to forget where they were told to wait. The one still walking the aisle. Abandoned church. Late 20th century. I went in thinking this would just be another documentation job. Old church, vandalized, collapsing roof. My task was simple. Photograph the interior before the building was scheduled for demolition. No expectations, no stories in my head. The silence inside was heavy, the kind that presses against your ears. Broken pews lined the aisle, covered in dust and graffiti. Whatever sanctity this place once had was long gone, or so I thought. I set up my camera facing the altar and took several shots down the center aisle. I didn't see anyone. It wasn't until later, reviewing the images on a larger screen, that I noticed the figure standing between the pews, tall, pale, human in shape, but without detail, like someone erased halfway through existence. It was positioned exactly where a person would walk during communion, moving slowly toward the front. There were no footprints in the dust, no sound recorded. I hadn't adjusted focus or exposure between shots. Local history explained part of it. This church closed decades earlier after a fire damaged the upper gallery. One caretaker reportedly refused to leave, continuing to unlock the doors every Sunday long after services ended. He died alone inside the building, never replaced. What unsettled me wasn't the idea of a ghost. It was the posture. The figure wasn't wandering. It wasn't lost. It looked like it was still doing exactly what it had done every week. Walking the aisle, long after the congregation stopped coming, she learned the sound of footsteps. Abandoned hospital wing, 1950s. Long before this corridor fell silent, it was known for its noise. Shoes striking tile, wheels rattling, nurses calling out room numbers and voices trained not to tremble. Patients learned to recognize footsteps the way others learned faces. Fast meant trouble. Slow meant relief. When the hospital downsized in the 1950s, this wing was used last. The people kept here were not urgent enough to move quickly and not healthy enough to send home. Among them was a woman who had no visitors and no discharge date. Records show her bed number changed often, but the corridor stayed the same. Years later, someone photographed the hallway out of curiosity. The building was empty. No electricity, no staff, just peeling paint and daylight leaking in from the far end. The figure wasn't noticed at first. Only after the photo was enlarged did it become clear. Something pale stood where the floor caught the light. Not blocking the hall, not reaching out, simply present, as if shaped by habit rather than intention. Old nurses used to say that woman memorized the rhythm of the building. She knew exactly where to stand when waiting to be called. The corridor no longer leads anywhere, but in the image, someone still stands where patients once paused, listening carefully, convinced that if she waits just a little longer, she'll finally hear her name. The habit of standing there, apartment living room, late 1970s. No one noticed the doorway because no one ever did. It was just a place people passed through, to the kitchen, to the bathroom, to leave. The room belonged to conversation and noise, not to thresholds. The young man sat in the chair the way people sit when they expect nothing to happen. Arms crossed, body settled. The photograph caught him mid-moment, unaware that the space behind him had chosen to remember something else. The figure in the doorway does not appear sudden. It looks practiced. Former tenants of the building spoke of an odd routine tied to that spot. The apartment once belonged to a man who waited there every night, standing quietly until his legs tired. He listened for the elevator, for keys, for footsteps that never slowed outside his door. Over time, neighbors stopped seeing him, but the doorway remained worn in a way no furniture could explain. In the photo, the figure stands with the same posture, shoulders slightly forward, arms hanging loosely, as if expecting interruption. It does not reach toward the living man. It does not react to the camera. It simply occupies the place it learned best. What makes the image unsettling isn't fear. It's familiarity. The ghost doesn't look lost. It looks like it's doing what it always did. Standing in its own doorway, waiting for someone who once promised they would come back and never did. The light that wasn't there before. Family living room, late 1960s. No one remembered turning the lamp on. The room was prepared for a simple family photograph. Everyone seated close, hands folded, faces set into that practiced stillness people adopted when film was expensive. The painting of Jesus on the wall was familiar, almost invisible from repetition. It had hung there for years, watching over birthdays, arguments, quiet evenings that left no mark. The photograph was taken quickly. One click, nothing more. When the image returned from processing, the family noticed the light first. A soft glow seemed to bloom around the face in the painting, brighter than the rest of the room, as if it had borrowed illumination from somewhere else. It wasn't a reflection. No window aligned with it. No flash flare touched the other surfaces nearby. The faces in the room were unchanged, calm, unaware. Later, someone recalled that the painting had once belonged to a relative who died suddenly. A man known for sitting beneath it every night, praying aloud when he thought no one was listening. After his death, the house felt quieter, but not emptier. What unsettles those who see the photograph isn't faith or disbelief. It's timing. The glow appears only in that single image. Not before, not after. As if something chose that moment. When everyone was present, when memory would be preserved. To remind them that watching did not always mean being absent, and that sometimes light doesn't come from a source. It arrives because it's needed. The show didn't end at the screen. Student apartment, early 1980s. They gathered around the television because that was where the night pointed them. The set was old, heavy, and unreliable. The kind that hummed before the picture settled. Music played, jokes landed. Someone pretended to sing into a bottle. The TV glowed with its soft, bluish promise that something was happening, even if nothing important was. The window behind them was supposed to be dark. No one looked at it when the photo was taken. The flash froze laughter, denim, the clutter of youth. The television sat like an altar, square, patient, bright. It wasn't until later that the other glow was noticed. Outside the glass, a pale figure stood close enough to fog the pane. Not reflected, not doubled. Upright, watching inward. The shape didn't smile or gesture. It simply occupied the exact height and distance of a person who knew the room well. Neighbors later spoke of a woman who lived there before the students. A night cleaner who worked odd hours and watched television through windows she passed, pausing when the sound drifted out. She died during a winter blackout, alone in a stairwell. The building replaced the bulbs, then the tenants. What unsettles the photograph isn't the ghostly outline. It's the symmetry. The TV throws light outward. The window returns it, muted, human, intent. As if the room had learned a habit. When people gather to watch, someone else will always gather too. The screen went dark years ago. The window, according to those who pass at night, still doesn't. What the glass still remembers. Private mausoleum. Early 1900s. The mausoleum was never meant to feel crowded. It was built for silence, for pauses between prayers, for the brief moments when the living stood close to the dead and tried not to imagine the distance between them. The stained glass was installed last, circular windows meant to soften the stone with color and remind visitors of heaven rather than decay. For years, nothing unusual was reported. Then someone noticed the shape. It appears faintly on the back wall, between the coffins and beneath the glass. Not carved, not stained. A vertical form, slightly darker than the surrounding stone, as if the wall itself had absorbed a presence and never released it. The shape has no sharp edges, no clear face. Only the suggestion of a body standing where no one could stand for long. Old burial records mention a caretaker assigned to this family crypt in the early 20th century. His job was simple: clean the floor, polish the metalwork, ensure the coffins remained undisturbed. After his wife died, he reportedly spent hours inside the mausoleum, sitting beneath the stained glass long after his work was done. When he passed, no one replaced him. The photograph was taken decades later, during a routine documentation of historic tombs. No one saw anything at the time. The space felt empty. Still, but the image tells a quieter story. The figure does not approach the coffins. It does not linger near the door. It stands exactly where someone once waited, between light and stone. As if watching over the dead had become a habit the body forgot how to stop performing. The glass still lets the light in, and the wall still remembers who stood there when no one else would. She wasn't part of the evening. Family gathering, mid-1960s. The room was busy in the way only family gatherings are. Conversations overlapped. Someone laughed too loudly. Another reached across a chair to make a point. Teacups rested in laps. Nothing was staged. Nothing was meant to last beyond the night. The photograph was taken from habit, not intention. Years later, when someone examined it more closely, the room still made sense. The women seated inside were familiar. Expressions mid-gesture, bodies relaxed, attention turned inward toward each other. But the door on the right changed everything. Behind the glass stood a woman no one remembered inviting. She wasn't reflected from the room. The lighting didn't match. Her outline was soft but deliberate, as if the glass separated her by rule rather than by accident. She wore what looked like a simple dress, bare arms hanging loosely at her sides. She faced inward, watching the gathering she did not belong to. The house had a quiet history. Before this family moved in, it was owned by an older woman who lived alone after her husband died. Neighbors recalled seeing her often at the back door, standing just inside the glass, watching life happen without stepping into it. When she passed away, the house changed hands quickly. What unsettles those who see the photograph isn't fear, it's recognition. The woman at the door doesn't look lost. She looks patient, as if she knows this room remembers her, even if the people inside no longer do. Everyone in the photo is engaged with the living. Only one figure remains on the threshold, watching, waiting, and never interrupting. They said the tower was empty. Rural church ruins, early 1900s. No one remembered the church while it was still alive. By the time this photograph was taken, the roof had already collapsed, the bells removed, the congregation scattered to newer towns with paved roads and electric light. What remained was the tower. Stone walls too stubborn to fall, windows cut deep and narrow like watchful eyes. The photographer came for the architecture, not the stories. The image developed soft and unfocused, the way early cameras often rendered distance. But one window refused to stay empty. Inside the right opening, a pale vertical shape appears, lighter than the stone around it, shaped too precisely to be shadow. It does not fill the window. It stands slightly back, as if aware of the edge. Old parish notes mention a woman who rang the bells alone for years after services dwindled. When attendance finally ceased, she continued coming, unlocking the door, climbing the tower steps, pulling ropes that no longer answered. Eventually, she stopped appearing. But the villagers claimed the sound of movement lingered long after. What unsettles viewers is not the blur, it's the restraint. The figure does not lean out. It does not call for attention. It stays inside the tower, framed by stone, exactly where someone would stand, to look down at a world that no longer came to meet them. The church did not collapse all at once. Some parts chose to remain upright, and in this photograph, something else appears to have made the same decision. To stay, to watch, and to wait for a sound that once meant everything. The dress that didn't belong to the night Private home, late 2000s. Everyone focused on the two women in front because that was the purpose of the photo. They were dressed for an evening out, smiling easily, standing close in the familiar way of friends who expected the night to continue long after the camera lowered. The house behind them was quiet, orderly, nothing out of place, except for the dress. In the background, just beyond their shoulders, stood a figure wearing a long, pale gown. It wasn't hung on a rack. It wasn't draped over furniture. It had shoulders, a waist, the suggestion of arms resting naturally at its sides. The fabric fell straight down, soft and old-fashioned, the kind worn to formal events decades earlier. No one remembered seeing anyone there. The figure didn't interrupt the moment. It didn't lean forward or demand attention. It stood back, almost politely, as if aware it did not belong to the evening but unwilling to leave it entirely. Its face is faint, unfinished, like something caught between appearing and remembering how to. The home had once belonged to another family. Years earlier, a young woman lived there who never attended the event she dressed for. Her gown was found hanging in an upstairs closet long after she was gone. No one could explain why it was never thrown away. What unsettles viewers isn't the contrast between living and dead. It's the posture. The figure looks ready, as if she finally made it downstairs, just a little too late to be invited into the photograph, but close enough to stand where memory still holds space for her. She stopped eating first, community hall cafeteria, late 1970s. The table was never meant for stillness. Trays slid, chairs scraped, voices crossed without listening. Someone laughed too loudly. Someone else stared into space while waiting to be called back to class. It was an ordinary afternoon, recorded without care. The girl in blue sat facing the room, her food untouched. She wasn't posing, she wasn't distracted, she was listening. Later, when the photo was examined, people tried to explain her expression first. Why she looked unsettled while everyone else leaned into conversation. Why her eyes fixed on something beyond the camera's concern. Only after that did they notice the crowd behind her. Among the overlapping faces, there is one that does not belong. It appears slightly out of alignment, paler than the rest, its gaze unfocused but direct, like someone trying to remember how to look alive. The face doesn't press forward. It stays suspended within the noise, unnoticed by everyone except the girl in front. Records from the hall mention an incident years earlier. A student who collapsed during lunch, dismissed at first as fainting. The cafeteria resumed its rhythm quickly. Chairs were rearranged. Meals continued. Her seat was filled the next day. What makes the photograph linger isn't the face itself. It's the timing. Everyone else is mid-motion, mid-sentence, mid-bite. Only one person has already stopped eating, and only one other, hidden in the crowd, seems to have finally come back. Not to sit, not to speak, but to see if anyone would notice this time. She smiled because she didn't know. Living room, early 1970s. The smile in the photograph is effortless. The kind that happens before people learn to pose for cameras. She's sitting comfortably, legs turned slightly inward, shoulders relaxed, eyes meeting the lens without hesitation. Nothing in her posture suggests fear, distraction, or awareness of anything behind her. The room feels lived in. Heavy curtains, patterned sofa, a cabinet cluttered with ordinary objects, ashtray, papers, things set down and forgotten. It is the background of a normal evening, not a stage. And yet, behind her, something else has taken shape. The figure is faint, almost careful. Its edges dissolve into the air, as if it arrived slowly and never finished arriving at all. It stands close, closer than comfort allows, but not touching. Its face is indistinct, suspended between expression and absence, like a memory struggling to stay intact. No one noticed it when the photo was taken. Years later, the house's history surfaced in conversation. A previous occupant had died there quietly. An older woman who spent most evenings sitting in that same room, watching television that no longer worked, listening to sounds that came from nowhere in particular. Neighbors said she rarely spoke, but she smiled often, especially when visitors were present. What makes the image unsettling isn't the ghostly shape itself, it's the contrast. The living woman smiles toward the future. The figure behind her seems anchored to the room, to the furniture, to the habit of standing just behind someone who doesn't know they're being watched. The photograph captured two moments at once, one moving forward and one that never learned how, before she learned to be afraid. Apartment hallway. Early 1980s. The child wasn't meant to be the subject for long. Someone called her name just after the photo, ready to scoop her up before she wandered too far down the hallway. She held a stick for balance, dressed in clothes chosen for warmth, not memory. The moment was ordinary. Another picture meant to prove she was growing. What makes the photograph linger is not the child. It's the way the hallway seems to pause behind her. Farther back, where the light thins and the walls close in, a shape forms. Not sharp enough to be mistaken for a person, but too deliberate to be shadow. It stands upright, aligned with the corridor, watching the child with a stillness that feels practiced. The child isn't looking back. Later, the family spoke about the apartment in fragments, about doors that closed gently on their own, about the hallway feeling longer at night, about a former tenant, an elderly woman, who used to walk that same stretch slowly, leaning on a cane, stopping often to rest. She lived alone. When she died, it was said she was found in the hall, halfway between rooms, as if she had forgotten where she meant to go. Children notice things adults dismiss. In the months after the photo, the girl refused to walk the hallway alone. She would stop at the doorway and wait, silent, as if expecting someone else to move first. She doesn't remember that now, but the photograph suggests someone remembers her, standing back, keeping distance, watching quietly, as if guarding the hallway the way she always did, long after her own footsteps disappeared. The visitor who never knelt. Woodland Cemetery. Late 1800s. The grave was designed to look peaceful. A woman carved in stone reclined as if resting, one arm drawn across her chest, the folds of her dress softened by decades of rain. Flowers were placed carefully along her body, refreshed often enough to suggest someone still remembered where to come. No one noticed the visitor at first. In the photograph, the statue commands attention, heavy and permanent. But to the left, half swallowed by ferns and shadow, stands a second presence. Narrow, upright, unfinished. It doesn't mirror the statue's pose. It doesn't lie down. It stands as if standing is all it knows how to do. Local records tell a quiet story. The woman memorialized here died young, buried far from the town she intended to leave with someone who never followed. Letters were written, unanswered. Visits were promised, postponed, then forgotten. The stone was raised by family. The flowers, however, came later, brought by someone else. Caretakers once mentioned seeing a figure near this grave at dawn, always on the same side, never touching the flowers. It would appear briefly, then fade back into the trees, leaving the arrangement undisturbed. What unsettles the image is not the presence of a ghost. It's the choice of position. The figure does not lie beside her. It does not replace her. It stands where a living person would stand when they arrive too late, unsure whether to kneel, speak, or leave. The statue rests forever. The visitor does not. And in this photograph, it seems the dead are not alone, but neither are they reunited. The call that interrupted dinner. Suburban kitchen. Mid-1980s. The oven was open because something had gone wrong. Smoke lingered low, the kind that makes you wave a hand without thinking. When the phone rang, she answered it out of reflex. Cords stretched tight across the kitchen as if urgency could be measured by distance. She stood there listening, not reacting, not smiling, waiting for the other person to finish speaking. That's when the photograph was taken. Nothing about the kitchen looked strange at first. The stove clock keeps time. The refrigerator holds notes and magnets. The moment feels interrupted, not staged. But lower in the frame, where no one thought to look, a face appears, pressed into the fabric of her jeans as if the cloth had briefly forgotten it was solid. The face is small, pale, childlike. Its eyes open, unfocused, not looking outward but up, trapped in the posture of someone who never learned how to stand. Later, a family story surfaced. Years earlier, the house had been owned by a young couple whose child died suddenly from illness. The room that became the kitchen was once a bedroom. The mother reportedly said she still heard crying near the floor, especially when appliances hummed. What unsettles viewers isn't the image itself, its placement. The face doesn't appear in the background, doesn't hover in the air. It presses close, where a child would cling when afraid, holding on, quiet, unnoticed. The call ended. Dinner was thrown away. Life moved on. But the photograph suggests something else stayed behind. Waiting at knee height, listening carefully, hoping someone would finally look down. The third place in the photo. Family living room. Christmas night, early 2000s. They stood close because the room was warm, and the tree took up more space than planned. Red curtains, ornaments catching the flash, a moment carefully framed to look like happiness holding still. The couple smiled the way people do when they believe the picture will be kept, maybe framed, maybe revisited years later. What no one framed was the space behind them. In the left window, faint but unmistakable, a shape appears where no reflection should settle. It isn't aligned with the camera. It doesn't match the couple's posture or the tree's lights. The outline suggests a head and shoulders set back slightly, as if standing in the cold outside and looking in. The house had a quiet reputation. Neighbors mentioned a former resident, an older relative who spent holidays alone after the family moved on. He used to stand by that same window during Christmas, watching lights across the street, waiting for cars that rarely stopped. When he died, the room was redecorated. New curtains, new traditions. The photograph doesn't show movement or intent. The figure doesn't press against the glass. It doesn't intrude. It simply occupies the only place left unclaimed by celebration. What unsettles those who see the image isn't fear, it's balance. Two people centered, alive, embraced. And a third presence, perfectly placed at the edge, not included, not erased. The tree was taken down weeks later. The ornaments packed away. Life continued forward. But the window, in this one image, remembers someone who always believed Christmas meant looking in and hoping quietly to be seen. The one who waited by the hood. City Street, late 1970s. The car mattered more than the photo. It was newly bought, freshly cleaned, parked where the light fell just right. The couple leaned against it with the confidence of people who believed movement was always forward. New places, new plans, no reason to look back. Someone lifted the camera. The street paused. The figure was already there. It stands beside the car's front, slightly apart from the couple, as if it arrived earlier and chose not to interrupt. The shape is thin, almost careful, its edges translucent against the metal and pavement. It doesn't mirror their posture or smile. It faces the car, not the camera, like someone waiting for permission to get in. Later, when the image was examined, neighbors filled in a detail no one had asked for. The spot had been a common pickup point years earlier, before traffic changed. People waiting for rides, leaning against fenders, watching reflections ripple across windshields. One young woman was killed there by a passing vehicle after stepping too close to the curb. The car never stopped. The place kept the habit. What unsettles the photograph isn't the presence of a ghost, it's the timing. The couple looks ready to leave. The car looks ready to go. And the figure stands where passengers stand, expectant, patient, slightly behind the moment. The engine, they say, started on the first try that day, but the photo suggests something else lingered. Not chasing, not warning, just waiting by the hood, believing that eventually someone would notice the seat it had been saving. Every photo you've seen was once an ordinary moment, until someone noticed what didn't belong. I won't tell you these are ghosts. I won't tell you they aren't. That choice is yours. Before you go, tell me in the comments, which image stayed with you the longest? Which detail felt wrong the moment you saw it? And if you have a photo you can't explain, share it. Because sometimes, the most unsettling part is realizing you were never alone.